Drills a defender. Soloniak fires. Scores!
Hello and welcome to Chicago Fire Weekly, presented by the Private Bank, the official bank of your Chicago Fire. I'm Fred Hubner. You recognize this guy, former Chicago Fire head coach and also player of Frank Klopas. Here we have Paul Tenorio. You see him on the sidelines on the CSN broadcast from Toyota Park. Also, you can read him at 442.com. We are live at the Heineken Pub 97 at the Private Bank Fire Pitch. We'll be here each and every Wednesday talking about the men in red, the 20th season of Chicago Fire soccer. We're going to have Dax McCarty join us in the third segment of the show. But Frank, 20th season of Chicago Fire soccer, and a lot to be excited about this season.
No, definitely, Fred, a lot to be excited. But before we even went on, you're watching those highlights, and we're all excited because we know that the season's about to begin, and obviously 20 years, it's amazing. So, I mean, a lot of excitement and a lot of things to look forward into this season, and very optimistic, as everyone should be.
I'm probably not as excited as the players who have gone through preseason, but I'm pretty tired of watching preseason soccer. So I'm just really pumped for Friday night, the first game. Portland, Minnesota kicks off the season, and then obviously the Fire in Columbus on Saturday, and everything gets rolling with MLS. It's just exciting to have soccer back again. You know, it's a short off season. Just 3 months ago, I was in Toronto for MLS Cup, but it feels like forever when you don't get soccer every weekend.
For some teams, it's short, but for some other teams, it's a lot longer. You know, because when I look at it, I mean, 2-3 months to be waiting. I think for me, it's a long time, and I think that from the player standpoint, you know, you get back into it from the preseason. You're 6-8 weeks into it. You can't wait for those games to start because no one wants to continue to be doing double sessions and 3 sessions like, you know, the team has. So I think for them, and I agree with Paul, I think that not only the player standpoint, from the fan standpoint, we're excited because we get to see some great soccer and some great players.
The one thing that everybody knows in every sport, be it football, be it basketball, be it soccer, everybody thinks they can improve. Everybody thinks they can win. But some of the moves made in the offseason makes you think as a Fire fan that, yes, this is going to be a better team than last year. There's more attacking weapons. There's more things to be excited about as the season gets here.
No, I mean, I agree with you. I think that when you look at the team last year, okay, obviously you look where they finished. But, I mean, throughout the season and the games that we've been able to watch, it was a team that when they had the ball, they were able to create a lot of chances. You know, they weren't able to finish. So in the offseason, I think the ability to go sign a proven goal scorer, you know, their ability now to retain and keep a guy like Soloniak, even though his numbers haven't been big, I felt that he was a very important part of the team. And I think just as Paul wrote in his article in 442 of players that you're looking to have breakout seasons, I do agree with him with Michael DeLue, because you look at his production numbers last year, and, you know, it's always difficult for a guy coming in at that point of the season, and the way he was able to adapt and what he, not only from scoring 7 goals in 17 starts that he had, but his willingness to work so hard off the ball and help the team and find ways to be positive. I think that he's someone that, you know, we're all looking forward to see what he can do this year, especially with the other pieces they've added. You know, Juninho in the midfield, but the guy that, you know, for me is a guy that I've always, when I was a coach, I always tried to bring him on my team. It never worked out. So it's going to be great just to have an opportunity to see him every day here and playing for the Fire. That's Dax McCarty, because he's got so much quality, I think, that with the ball, but also the leadership qualities that he brings to the team. And this is something that the Fire and the team talked about, bringing players, not only with quality, but leadership qualities. And he's one guy that I think is at the top of that.
Well, that's the thing is that, you know, I think the offseason feels even longer when you see all the pieces for your team that get added and you start to get excited about what they're going to look like. You just want to see it on the field. And, you know, obviously I agree with everything Frank said. You know, watching this team week in, week out last year, there were games where they were competitive, but they just needed that extra level in the middle of the field to keep the ball, because it's very difficult to defend as long as they were defending at some points in the last few games or last season. They needed a bigger presence in central midfield, and they did that not just with one player, but with 2, Juninho and Dax, and I'm very interested to see how those 2 pair together. We'll ask Dax about that later on in the show, but then the attacking pieces are finally there, and for me, a big piece of this is David Accam. We know what he can do. We've seen him the last couple seasons, and the fact that he is one of the most dangerous players on the ball in this league. But now he's a guy, he can lift his head up, he can look for help, and he knows Nemanja Nikolic is going to be there. He knows Michael DeLue is going to be in the right spot, and his service becomes the next level of his game that makes him that much harder to defend.
No, 100%. And I think when you have quality of players around you and the pieces they've added, I think it just is going to create a lot more space for him. He's going to be able to be isolated a lot more. The key with him is that he has to be patient at times, because as plays develop, for him to be able, if he needs to be out wide and just be a little bit patient, I think he needs to do that, because now you have players in the midfield, whether it's Juninho, whether it's Dax, that, through possession, is possession with purpose now. You're able to, to keep the ball on one side of the field and maybe bring the opposing team there, and then the ability of the quality of players that you have with one switch to isolate this guy 1v1. So I think he's going to benefit a lot from the quality of players that they've added.
Well, and too, rebuilds are never easy, okay? And we knew going into last season, Veljko Paunovic, Nelson Rodriguez coming here, taking over. They added some guys in the back line, and these are going to be key guys. We're going to talk about them in the next segment. You've got guys like Campbell, you have Kappelhoff, you have Brandon Vincent. But it's kind of like, okay, that was that. Now the midfield and up front. And rebuilds are not easy. We saw it work on the north side with the Cubs, and obviously that's what all Fire fans are hoping for as we continue to build this team.
But it took time for the Cubs also.
Oh,
it took
sure
over,
did.
there was a plan over 5 years.
I'm
right?
a big believer in this league. I've said many, many times when I was covering Orlando City and beyond that it usually takes 3 years to build in this league. Why? Because you need to first identify your core. That's the first season. I think the Fire were there last year. You start to add the pieces that are going to make up the core of the team. But then you need the second part to really look at where those weaknesses are and go out and address those very specifically. Mm-hmm. And then you hope in the third year that now you're just adding the complementary pieces. I compare this team, in my view, to Philadelphia last year. I believe they were in year 2 of their build. They had a lot of the pieces there already a couple years ago. Last year they added a few more, and they were right there in the hunt for the playoffs. They made the playoffs at the 6th seed, and now they tried to just add 1 or 2 more pieces. I actually think they could have done better adding 1 or 2 pieces. But that's where I look at the Fire. I think this is a team with what they added. They should be fighting in that 4, 5, 6 spot in a very, very competitive Eastern Conference this year.
When we come back, we'll take a closer look at the additions to the team this year. We will also talk a little bit about the opener a little bit later on in the show as the Chicago Fire in Columbus this weekend, a game you can catch on CSN at 12:30 with the pregame, 1 o'clock with the kick. And you're listening right now and watching Chicago Fire Weekly, brought to you by the Private Bank. We're getting a look at this season's team. We'll get a closer look at this season's team, obviously, on Saturday when they take on the Columbus Crew SC, a 12:30 pregame on CSN. Also, you can catch the game 1 o'clock with the kick. Monday was the kickoff luncheon. Each and every year, one of the biggest events for the Chicago Fire, the kickoff luncheon over at the Hyatt Regency. General Manager Nelson Rodriguez had a chance to talk about the team going forward into the opener.
The bright spots of the preseason have been how easily Dax and Juninho have fit into midfield. Now, the downside to that is Matt Polster suffered an injury. We haven't had a chance to integrate him with those two guys and see what that might look like. I think Nemanja and Michael DeLue have shown a very good understanding early on. I think David Accam has shown a renewed spirit, a renewed commitment on the defensive side of the ball, and he's actually, through the course of preseason, I think shown more to his game than he's been able to show in the past. Those are positives. The back line is similar to last year, not exact. Matt Lamson's injury hurts a little bit in goal. It forces Bava to be more ready. And so, again, that takes time. But the way it seems to be coalescing is a good indicator. If it stays the way it is, it's not good enough. So it still needs to get better because the demands of the season will be far greater.
Trying to put this team together, and Frank, one of the things he talked about were attacking weapons. And when you go on out and get a guy like Nikolic, and you have Michael DeLue for the entire season, and David Accam, that's nice guys to have up front scoring goals.
No, definitely. I mean, obviously, we talked about what Michael DeLue did last year, and based on that, you feel like he's going to have another great season, especially with the additions not only on top, but as you look a little bit centrally also in the midfield. So they went out and they wanted to get a proven goal scorer also, and someone that can play and take some pressure away from the other guys. So you go out and you get someone like Nikolic, and if you look what he's done, obviously wherever he's been, whether it's in Hungary or in Legia Warsaw, he's a guy that scores goals. You got to provide service to him. He's a guy that, from everything that I've watched and the clips, he's a guy that anticipates and reads play really well. He's always there, and technically he's very sound. But he obviously needs service, and I think his ability now to work well off with DeLue is going to be the key because, their movement and how they create space and who goes in depth and who comes, I think all that stuff is going to be sorted out. That's why preseason is so important, Paul.
Right. Well, I think that's what you see in preseason. You hope that some of these guys you brought in start to understand each other better because you want to take a little bit of the thinking out of it and allow the instincts to take over. Whether that's in the midfield partnership with Dax and Juninho, whether that's up top with Nikolic and DeLue, you have to have an understanding of, like Frank was saying, when one guy goes as a striker, you're filling in space or you're peeling off and making that far post run. And, it was important to me to watch in preseason how those guys interacted, to see, Nikolic assisting for Accam at moments, vice versa. DeLue, he just works so hard the entire game. I think that's his biggest quality. He's going to be in the right spot. You can depend on him to defend and press. I think that'll be important in the midfield as well. But I think Frank is alluding to this, the chemistry between the two central midfielders and those two strikers especially is going to be important. We saw how effective Dax McCarty was last year with the Red Bulls. He can pick out that pass. He found Sasha Kleshin in between the lines. There's no Sasha Kleshin on this team, but that's the space where you're going to see Juninho trying to find a little bit more. You're going to see, I hope, Michael DeLue checking into that space a bit more. All of that comes with time. It's just going to come with games. It's going to come with reps, and that's what we're going to start seeing on Saturday.
Well, you talk about improved service, and you guys both mentioned it. Unselfish play from the guys up front. It means a lot when you have more than one guy that can score goals. I know it sounds silly to say, but when you have more than one guy that the defense is going to have to concentrate on, and remember, these guys are there, that's got to help the team offensively.
No, 100%. And I think, look, I mean, you have options now. I mean, if you play with Accam, and we know him, his ability in space and his pace and, technically in tight spaces to be able to get by defenders, I don't think anyone is as fast as he is with the ball running at you. And it's a scary thing to see. And now, obviously, his ability in the final third when he's able to go by players just to get his head up, because now he has some good quality players that can put those passes away. And then, obviously, Arturo, if he's playing and he's starting out wide, he's a guy that's going to come inside. He's very smart. He can come in, but his head is always up looking for those runs in depth or in feet, and he's looking to combine. If Solinger comes in, I mean, obviously, he's another guy that brings a lot of pace. So there's different kind of weapons and characteristics depending on how the coach, Panovich, wants to attack a certain team, and he has those options now.
And you mentioned Alvarez there, and I think last year when we talked about this team, Alvarez is a guy that maybe not a lot of people thought about. As the season went on, though, he played a key role for the team, scoring and assisting last year.
I think Arturo had his best season of his career. He scored goals. Like Frank said, he had some assists. He always is dangerous enough to pick his head up and find that pass behind the back line. I think he'll be even better this year because he has other guys to combine with. When he comes in on that left foot, he can combine with Juninho, he can combine with Dax McCarty, and he's also got those weapons to get his head up and look for that final pass. And then, like Frank was saying, you know, there's a different level now to this team in that now you're bringing a guy like Luis Solignac off the bench versus starting him and maybe having fewer options off the bench. He's a little bit different, dynamic, a little bit of a grittier player. He can be a bit more physical as well. You like to see that. So I think they have some options here, and Goossens as well, who's able to come and play on the right, play inverted, or he can play on the left. So there are a few more options for the Fire this year.
You have options, you have experience, and obviously I think what you've done also, you've created some competition in training because, I mean, a lot of your decision-making besides the game is based on that. So if you really want to create a competitive environment, because for me, it's all about training hard to prepare yourself for the next game.
We haven't forgot about the back line, obviously very important. The guys in front of the keeper, we'll get to them in just a little bit. Don't forget the opener coming up on Saturday in Columbus. The home opener coming up on March 11th, 1 o'clock at Toyota Park. Get your tickets at chicago-fire.com. We come back, we'll be joined by one of the newest members of the Chicago Fire. Dax McCarty will join us right here on Chicago Fire Weekly, presented by the Private Bank.
Kane gonna wait for help. Kane dropped it to Taves. Got away from Gessler. Cuts it with a shot. He scores!
Here on the couch, Dax McCarty. Dax, it was an interesting season, off season for you. They say off seasons sometimes are a little bit shorter, but you got married, you got moved, you went to the U.S. men's national team. Lots of excitement. How you adjusting to everything?
Yeah, I fit about 5 years worth of events into about a month. So it was wow, crazy. I'd say 2 months. It was amazing. My wedding was incredible. Something I'll never forget. And then obviously going into national team camp, getting traded. Just having to navigate all those emotions and all those feelings. I mean, it was a whirlwind for sure. And I didn't say much in the beginning, but I wanted to make sure that I processed everything and let it all sink in before I came out and said my farewells, because I was in New York a long time. So really happy to be a part of the Chicago Fire family and looking forward to the season.
Dax, obviously, you go to national camp, which means you came into preseason a bit late. Once you came in here, what was the process like to first get to know the team, but then to start that very important part of it, which is getting to know Juninho on the field and how that partnership is going to work between the two of you?
Yeah, I did an interview with Howler Magazine while we were down in Bradenton, and I got asked a similar question about how it feels to kind of integrate into a new team. And the thing that I believe, and the thing that always jumps out to me whenever any new player joins a new team is, I think the main goal for any player, whether he's young or old, is to go into the locker room and to go on the field and earn the respect of your teammates and coaches right away with how you play. Not with, how you talk to them, not with how popular you are in the locker room. Go on the field and show these guys that not only are you a good player, but you're going to come in and try to help the team win. So that was my mindset. Try to come in and earn the respect of the guys on the field. They've played. Some of them have played against me. Some of them have played with me. But anytime you come into a new environment, you want to make sure you're not stepping on anyone's toes, but you want to make sure you're all business and you're here to win. So I tried to do that. And then obviously getting to know Juninho a little bit. He's a fantastic player. He's someone I have a ton of respect for. We're very similar players. Both of us have played for some pretty successful teams in the past couple of years, but whenever I played against Juninho when he was on LA and I was on New York, it was a mutual respect. I didn't know him that well personally, but it was always a thing after the game where we'd shake hands and say, good battle, and I think he's going to be a tremendous asset for this team.
Dax, for me, first of all, just congratulations, because with the national, not only coming here, because I'm excited, and I'm sure all the Fire fans, but just that call up back to the national team, I think it was well earned and long overdue.
Thank you.
But talk a little bit with the preseason. I'm sure every time you go to a preseason, 6-8 weeks, it's a long process.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that, and then also talk a little bit what should the Fire fans expect to see a little bit from a style of play.
Sure.
With the additions that the team has made.
This preseason felt a little longer for sure. I don't know why that is, but. It was a good preseason, and it was a preseason that was a lot of hard work. I heard from a lot of the guys when I first got to camp that I missed probably 2 of the hardest weeks that any of them have ever been through. And so I think that shows you kind of the sense of urgency that the team feels and the coaching staff feels, but also the physical demands of MLS are a lot, and you have to be ready for a massive schedule of games, 34 games, Open Cup, all the other things that entail it. So it's been a good preseason. As for what they should expect, well, the first thing I'll say is, don't expect any miracles. Let's make sure that I think we look at the season, and the phrase that I use when I talk about our team is let's be cautiously optimistic, because I've seen some things in preseason that make me extremely optimistic about where this team can go, but I also see some things that we need to work on. So it's going to be a process. This is a very new team, a lot of new players, obviously, but it's one of those things where you see the pieces they've added, and it feels like this team can do something a little special and definitely be more successful than we were the last 2 years. That's certainly unacceptable. I'm a guy that hates losing, and I'll make sure that I'm a pain in the ass. Can I say ass? Sorry. I'll make sure I'm a pain in the ass if we're not getting good results. But as for a style of play, I think we want to be a team that's good at everything. I think we have obviously tremendous speed and fantastic attacking players. So I think in transition we're going to be a very good team. But defensively we need to be able to protect our defenders as well. So me and Juninho, our job is going to be to protect the back line, make sure that we're not getting exposed defensively. So we're going to be a team that's better in possession, and we're also going to be a team that can still hit you on the counterattack. So I think we're going to be very dangerous.
Well, that's one thing we saw from you in New York, and we've seen the role of certain number 6s in this league change, where you're playing a little bit deeper, you're dropping in between those center backs at time to get the ball and start the attack.
Yep.
Do you see yourself staying in that role, or do you find yourself a little bit more interchangeable because you and Juninho are similar players, where you just have to feel the game of when you go and when you stay?
Absolutely. And, we've had good conversations with myself and Juninho, with Coach Paunovic, and I think he wants it to be a free-flowing thing. He doesn't want to set a limit on, where I want to go tactically or where Juninho goes tactically. I think Juninho and I have a good understanding on the field. I think more often than not, it's going to be me that's going to be a little bit deeper than Juninho. I mean, I think you guys saw in the game against Toronto, he's got a cannon on him. So we want him pushing forward.
You had a pretty good volley yourself early in the
Look, man, that happens like once every 5 years, so don't expect that much. But Juninho, he's got that in his arsenal, and he's another very dangerous guy in the attack. So I think what you'll see me drop a little bit deeper at times, but Juninho is very good at starting the attack as well. That was kind of his job with LA. So I think both of us will be very interchangeable. I think the main thing is just we want to be that solid foundation in the middle of the field. If you can win the middle of the midfield in most MLS games, you're going to be a successful team.
You'll be able to see Dax and the rest of the Chicago Fire this Saturday when they take on Columbus Crew SC, the Chicago Fire in Columbus. A nice little rivalry. We'll talk about that and much, much more. We come back. You can catch the game 12:30 pregame, 1 o'clock the kick on CSN Chicago. And don't forget, Chicago Fire home opener coming up on the 11th against RSL. You can get your tickets at chicago-fire.com. It's Chicago Fire Weekly, presented by the Private Bank. Welcome back to Chicago Fire Weekly, presented by the Private Bank. We are out at the Heineken Pub 97 at the Private Bank Fire Pitch. We'll be here each and every Wednesday. We have a chance today to be talking with one of the newest members of the Chicago Fire, Dax McCarty. And before they get into the X's and O's and everything else, New York pizza, Chicago pizza. Have you had Chicago pizza? And if so, your opinion. And we won't hold it against you.
I haven't had the pleasure of having Chicago pizza yet. I've only been here for like 4 days total.
Okay.
And even on road trips, it's kind of funny. We had on New York, we had a couple English guys that are obsessed with Nando's, which is a chicken place from England. So we wouldn't go get pizza after a game. We go to Nando's. So I haven't had Chicago pizza yet, but it's got a lot to live up to. New York pizza is pretty good. Keeping an open mind, though.
Okay, that's good.
The one thing with Paul, he said that he's got an unbelievable shot. The one thing I remember from him is the goals that he's been able to score off set pieces. And when you look at him, you're saying this guy, he's not the tallest guy, but it just seems to be in the right spot. He reads the game. And when we played against them, I know there was one guy we used to circle. You got to keep an eye on Dax because he always finds a way to score set pieces.
They give him no respect, man. He scores his headers, so many headers.
They're marking me with guys my size, and I love that. I'm making my chops at that. You got to mark me with like Kai Kamara.
I made sure we marked them with big guys, but somehow he got free and scored.
It's not the other way around. As long as you're not marking Kai on the other side of the field.
Yeah.
No, but the one thing I wanted to get back to from a tactical standpoint, I know that the team gave up 58 goals last year.
Yeah.
And I think with the players that they've been able to bring in and their ability now to keep the ball a little bit more, they put 10, 15 passes together, which if you're able to do that, I think you're able to move your lines, be a little bit more compact, and then in transition, you can press a little bit better. How much is that going to help having players, yourself and Juninho on the field?
It's going to help a lot. And when you are able to do that as a team, it takes a little bit of pressure off your defense. Your defense doesn't have to constantly be involved in these transition moments where the game's going back and forth and getting stretched. You can stay more compact. Like you said, a big term in world soccer nowadays is counter press. And I think that's something that all good teams, they need to do well. And that means when you lose the ball high up the field, you go and try to win it back immediately. And I think that's something that with me and Juninho in there, I think guys, especially the attacking players, will have more freedom to try things in the attacking half. If they don't come off, go try to win the ball back right away. And if a team gets out, one pass, two passes, you know that you have that solid foundation of two defensive midfielders that are there to protect the back line. Because obviously, a back line, it can bend, but then when it breaks, it's just kind of demoralizing for the team. And so you need those two solid building blocks in the middle of the field to take the pressure off the defense.
Well, first of all, I think I'd get in trouble if I don't mention the Winter Park MLS Coffee Club. Dax McCarty is a part of it. Now that you're in Chicago, we'll have a Chicago faction of it. I imagine the real estate situation's a little bit better, a bigger apartment here than in New York?
Unbelievable. It's my wife and I, after national team camp, I came here and we were apartment searching, and the second place we saw, it was beautiful, crown molding, hardwood floors, twice as big as my Manhattan apartment, and $1,200 cheaper. And it was just one of those situations where my wife and I looked at each other and just like, all right, we can get used to this.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're looking at we haven't talked a lot about the back line, but that's a big part of it for you as well. How are you seeing that chemistry grow, especially with the center backs and Joao and Kappelhoff behind you, but then also a guy who I think still needs to be mentored a bit, and Brandon Vincent, and you went to college with Michael Harrington. So
sure, the back line for me is crucial if we're going to be successful this year. And I think in preseason we've seen some really good things out of them. The one thing with the back line in general that I'll say is it's not the most vocal group of guys. And so the one thing I try to constantly stay on top of all of them. Michael Harrington, he's a veteran guy. He's playing at right back, and he's really vocal, probably the most vocal of all of them. And that's good, but you need a center back who's willing to step up and say, all right, this is my defense. Everyone's going to take the cues on me. And I think both Joao and Johan are both very good players, and they're capable of doing that, as well as Jonathan Campbell, who I've been really impressed with, who's another great piece that we're going to have. But those three guys, the basis of your foundation of how good your defense is going to be has to come from leadership. And so communication with those guys is essential. Brandon Vincent has all the talent in the world, but he's quiet as a mouse. I try to tell him he needs to open his mouth more. I don't care how young you are. If you're going to be successful as a defense, two things. You obviously can't concede goals, but you also have to be able to cover each other. And there are going to be breakdowns at times during games, but if we have our defenders in good positions covering each other, we're going to save a lot of goals.
You look at it, and you mentioned leadership there. And when the Chicago Fire get a guy like you and bring you in, is there any pressure to be a leader? How does that work? Is it just what you do on the field, or is it talking to all the players, and do they just earning the respect?
Absolutely. I mean, like I told you before, I want to come in and earn the respect of the guys in the locker room and my coaching staff by what I do on the field, and not really, my voice. I know the type of guy I am, and I know the type of player that I've evolved into, and I just naturally take on more of a leadership role because I like to have my voice heard. I have strong opinions about, things if the team is doing well, if the team's not doing well. So I think that just comes naturally for me, but I try to always, have an even keel. If things go great and the team's doing really well, I try to look at what we can do better because you don't ever really want to get too comfortable and content. When things aren't going so well, you don't want to say the world is ending, the sky isn't falling. These are just things that you need to correct and get better. So I think the team did a good job of bringing in some experienced guys like myself and Juninho and Nikolic, guys like Arturo Alvarez and Delu. There are some really good veteran guys on this team and some good experience. And so it's not going to just be me. It's not going to just be Juninho. It's going to be a whole cast of guys that have to be leaders on the field if we're going to be successful.
Dax McCarty, one of the newest members of the Chicago Fire. You'll be able to see him and the rest of the team this coming Saturday. They open the MLS season in Columbus. There'll be a lot of Fire fans. They take buses up there to Columbus. It should be a fun time. And it is a 1 o'clock kick, 12:30 pregame. Dex, best of luck this season. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. Take a sip of the beer.
We will.
We're all just
you
hanging
figure
out.
the later segments will definitely will. Paul can start now. We are at the Heineken Pub 97. It's the Chicago Fire Weekly Show right here, brought to you by the Private Bank.
26 seconds. A child drops.
Welcome back to Chicago Fire Weekly, presented by the Private Bank. Fred Hubner along with Frank Lopez, Paul Tenorio, and it's time for Fire Field Vision, powered by NovaCare. The Chicago Fire getting ready for the season opener. They had their kickoff luncheon the other day, and head coach Veljko Paunovic talked about where he feels the team has improved in the offseason.
We improved for sure. I think where we improved is in the leadership. I think the leadership, obviously, our players that we brought this year, they have a strong careers behind them, and careers that they were successful and they proved their leadership role on their teams. That's very important. I think that when you have that, then you bring other pieces. Now we have to make them play as a team, which I think at this point we are doing, but we still can do better.
So we talked a little bit earlier in the segments about the offseason upgrades and the attacking prowess, and Veljko was talking about some things there. This week they play Columbus, a big rivalry for the Chicago Fire. The Fire and Crew SC, always a big rivalry. How do you guys feel that the Fire, it's tough, you know, all you've seen is preseason, first game of the season, but how do you feel they're going to attack Columbus on Saturday?
Well, here we go. Coach Klopas has his notes out. I've had a sip of beer. We're ready to break it down.
Well, we've had the notes, but you never know. You know, you can kind of predict a little bit, starting lineup and players are going to play. But for me, nothing's going to change the way Columbus is going to play. It's their 4-2-3-1 system. I think that the attacking four there, where it's Kamara, Higuain, Miram, and Finley, I think, and mostly Higuain is the guy that kind of everything goes through him in the final third, and I think that's one guy that, Paul, through injuries last year, they kind of missed him. And obviously Miram is the guy that, that's going to come inside. He scored 5 goals last year, but he had a lot of assists. So they're attacking four. They're pretty dynamic. I mean, and then in the midfield, Will Trapp is a guy that's just going to sit, be kind of a deep kind of pivot playmaker that's going to orchestrate everything from a deep spot. And then we just don't know who's going to be along with him.
For the Fire, when you're talking about this stuff, what Frank is alluding to here, at the end of the day, it's going to be really important to win the middle of the park against this team. They like to keep the ball, and their two most important players on the ball are in the middle of the park, in Higuain and Will Trapp. So already, right away, we're going to see a big task in the middle of the park for the new pieces of the Fire.
I think centrally, I think you have to make sure that you do a very good job, because with Higuain dropping in the midfield, they like to create overload. So I think it's a key that the team does not get stretched at times, whether it's Delu coming in from a forward to help the midfield or one of the center backs stepping in there. I think that all has to be coordinated extremely well, but it's key. If you stretch, it becomes more difficult to cover those spaces, and there's a lot more room for Miram and Higuain to get the ball.
Well, we talked about this when we were watching preseason, Frank and I. It's a very important game as well for the fullbacks, because they have to stay organized and in line because of the runs that the Columbus likes to run. It's an inverted winger system where Finley's coming in, Miram's coming in, and Higuain is so very good at having the ball and finding that diagonal pass that breaks through the back line. So the fullbacks and the center backs have to communicate, and obviously with Ola Kamara up top, the center backs can't afford to get stretched wide to handle those wingers. It's going to be up to guys like Brandon Vincent, Juninho, Dax, and Michael Harrington to communicate and make sure they're covering those runs and able to step in and intercept the ball.
No, definitely. And obviously their other strength, that they, like Paul said, that the outside backs are going to get forward. They try to create overloads centrally, but also in the wide areas with the outside backs getting forward. The one thing with the wide players, with Vincent and whoever plays, if it's Harrington on the right side, you're matched up 1v1 on the side, because if they're playing with Kamara on top, Kamara is 2v1 with the center backs. One can get them tight, the other can provide the cover. So it's very important that the wide players, whether it's Vincent and Harrington, anytime the ball is switched, that they make sure that they get out wide very quick and they defend those 1v1 situations extremely well. And it's also important now for the outside backs, whether it's, if a fool is going to get forward, that if it's a calm on that side, that he's able to track him and stay with him. But that's why, as we talked before, their ability now to possess the ball and move the team higher up the field, because when you lose it, the team can press higher up the pitch, and then the calm doesn't have to make those 60, 70 runs back and forth.
Right. We've seen two kind of lines of thinking with Columbus. A big one is to press high and win the ball in their end of the field. That was something that was done very effectively 2 years ago in MLS Cup by Portland, if you remember. The danger there is to get stretched a little bit too much. They play that long ball, and he heads it down to the inverted runs. But I think another interesting aspect is going to be when Columbus has the ball, and they're very good at keeping the ball, especially at home. You're going to be playing a little bit deeper, absorbing that pressure. How can you get out quickly in the counterattack? You know, if Afful is pushed up the field, that means David Accam could be in space on that left wing. Can you find him quickly? And then does he have pieces to go with him? Accam's very, very quick. It's difficult for guys to keep up with him in the counter, but I think that's going to be a key part, especially on the road, to be able to find that quick outlet pass.
No, I agree, but I think if you limit Accam, if you expect Accam not to be making those 60, 70 runs where he's tracking Afful and now he's got to make a 60-yard run forward, it makes it extremely difficult. Now their ability to possess the ball and then move the lines up higher up the field when they lose it, now maybe he has to make that run up to the halfway line or try to win it right away. Plus also their back line. There's a lot of new guys there, a new goalkeeper. Test them early. They're going to be under pressure. It's different preseason game. It's different the real game now.
That's a great note. There's two very good finishers in the middle of the park right now for Chicago and a very young goalkeeper in Zach Steffen. There's going to be some nerves for him. Get him tested early, get some shots on goal.
We'll take a closer look at the game coming up this Saturday. Don't forget, you can see the game on CSN Chicago, 1 o'clock kick, a 12:30 pregame, and we'll take a look at more at Columbus, and also we will take a little bit more closer look at if Dax and Higuain, are they going to be going at each other throughout the course of the game in that midfield? We'll discuss that much more. Fred Hubner, Paul Tenorio, and Frank Lopez at Chicago Fire Weekly right here, brought to you by the Private Bank. Okay, now we're a little messed up.
This is so, huh?
Our hand, wrist, and elbow experts are pioneers worldwide. You need us in your corner. Midwest Orthopedics.
Primer presented by Valspar, the official paint of your Chicago Fire. We talked a little bit, guys, in the last segment about Higuain, and there were several games last year where he would get a little frustrated not getting the ball up top, and he'd come all the way back to the midfield, sometimes even further back, to get the ball to lead the charge up front. That means that the midfield, especially Dax, our earlier guest, they may be going against each other quite a bit in this game.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're the Fire, your goal is to keep Higuain off the ball as much as possible. He is the star of the show. He facilitates everything, whether it's the fullbacks getting forward, whether it's those runs in from the wingers, whether it's Ola Kamara's movement up top. It's going to start with Higuain. And if you can keep him off the ball, yes, you want him getting frustrated. You want him dropping. The further away from the goal he's getting the ball, the better it is for you. And so, yeah, Dax McCarty, the central midfielders, are going to have to make sure that they handle Higuain, because that is what Columbus is going to want to do. They want him on the ball as much as possible. Will Trapp, this season, we saw last year when Higuain went out, Greg Berhalter was asking a lot of Will Trapp to try to deliver that final pass. I spoke with Greg Berhalter after the season, and he said, you know what, I made a mistake doing that. I need to simplify things for Will, let him sit really, really deep in midfield and be the guy before the final pass, and allow Higuain to be the person that's doing that. So if he's dropping deep into Will Trapp's zone, you're doing a good job and you're disrupting what the crew want to do.
Yeah, I agree with Paul, and I think that's going back to our last point. It's so important for the team, for the Fire team, to be really compact. You know, the longer they're stretched out, the more pockets that Higuain has to come in between those lines and receive the ball. Not if you're 7-8 yards from line to line. You know, if they're even attempt, you know, one of the center backs can tuck in. It's either, you know, Dax and Juninho can come help, DeLu can come. So it's a lot easier when you're closer together to be in a position when you can help each other out. And yeah, if he drops back, I agree with Paul. Let him come all the way back the ball. He's not going to hurt you there.
Well, Frank, you know, today for 442, I wrote an article about the Golden Boot potential winners this season, and I think one guy that's overlooked a lot, Ola Kamara. People look at him and say, well, you're not Kai Kamara. Kai obviously scored 22 goals a couple years ago, was in the running with Jovinko. Last year, though, Ola Kamara had 16 goals in 20 games. What do you think? What does he bring different than Kai Kamara?
He's a little bit different than Kai in the sense that I think Kai, his physical presence in the box and his aerial ability was second to none, and his ability to play with his back to goal. He's physically strong. He can link up play with the guys and then get in the box. But the one thing with Columbus, and I think the one thing that Kamara brings, I think a lot more pace, because he has the ability now to turn, to link up and turn and go into depth, and he's a lot faster than Kamara. But the team is very disciplined, and then they know they have a goal scorer, and everyone's going to look to play to him. If it's the outside backs or Finley slashing a shot to support him, they're going to look for him in that final third to find him to finish plays off. And if they do, you know, you saw last year 16 goals, and I agree with you, but he's a little bit more dangerous, because if you're playing higher up the field, he's a guy with his space that can get behind you.
Yeah, you talk about the Columbus Crew, and they're a team, you know, they open up the season, Chicago Fire knew they wanted to improve. What happened to Columbus last year? Because everybody expected a better year, especially after the year before that. It didn't happen. What was the problem?
I asked Greg Berhalter that question last year during the USA-Mexico qualifier there in Columbus, and what he said is he had a little bit too much faith in his team. He went out and acquired depth pieces thinking that his starters were going to be able to have the exact same years they had the year before, and what he missed was competition. And what ended up lacking was a little bit of that bite out of the team. Ethan Finley had a down year. Will Trapp had the concussion, and I think he struggled to come back from it. Higuain was lost to injury. Kai Kamara was traded. So much change happened in that team, and they just weren't able to cope. You look at this year's team, though, clearly Greg Berhalter learned a lesson from it. Went out and got a DP center back. This has been a team that's given up a lot of goals over the last couple years. You've got a new goalkeeper, Zach Steffen, in goal. You've got a new left back. You've got a new defensive midfielder next to Will Trapp. So a lot of change on that back line. It's going to take some time for them to adjust, I'm sure, but Greg Berhalter was very aggressive this year in finding the weaknesses and addressing them.
Yeah, and then the one thing for me, just to add to Paul's point, and I think he's stuck with some of the guys way too long, because I think within a team, I think you have to have competition. And, you know, if Finley's having an off year, if he's not getting it done game 1, 2, 3, 4, you got to give the opportunities to the other guys. And I just think they didn't have that. And at some point, the guy said, really, no matter what I do, this is his starting group, and he's going to play the guys over and over again. So I just think maybe he learned from there. He made some additions. I still feel that losing Parkhurst in the back, which I think is a good player and a great leader for them. We'll see how they've been able to replace that back line, and also with a new goalkeeper, and that's why there's going to be opportunities for the Chicago team really to press them and put them under pressure and see how they cope with it.
Early in preseason, too, we saw Columbus experimenting with a three-man back line. I wouldn't be surprised to see Greg Berhalter play with the tactics over the course of the year, but when you're a coach and you have a system that you love, you tend to go back to it. So they're back to 4-2-3-1. Probably going to stick with it.
Yeah, well, he tried it once in Brazil, and they lost 7-0, so that quickly turned. Let's go back to what we know. But you have two teams. I think the Fire have had, again, a great preseason, but also I think Columbus, they won the Charleston Cup, so you have both teams going in to the first game with confidence, but also skeptical, like, you heard Pano talk about, and also Dax, you know that it's going to take some time. You have to be optimistic like we are because of the additions that the team has made, but it's a process. But for me, if they can go and get a result on the road, it'd be a huge, great start for them.
Well, and the nice thing, too, is that the players and the coaches and Nelson Rodriguez, they realize 6-0 in the preseason. That means nothing. That means nothing come Saturday at 1 o'clock when they start the game against Columbus. It's a whole new season, and like you said, a point in Columbus would be good. Obviously, a win in Columbus is even better. We'll talk more about that. We'll also talk about the new season in Major League Soccer. It all gets underway on a Friday evening. That was the Valspar Primer presented by Valspar, the official paint of your Chicago Fire. Don't forget the home opener coming up Saturday, March 11th against RSL. Get your tickets at chicago-fire.com. You're watching Chicago Fire Weekly, presented by the Private Bank.
What defines a champion? Is a champion someone who is better than...
Come by any Wednesday night. 6 o'clock is when we start the show. Come on by, have a few beverages. You get a chance to talk and learn soccer from Frank Lopez, Paul Tenorio. Frank, you were just saying, do you know everything you know by reading 442?
Listen, Paul is a very talented person. Seriously, when I want to get any scoop or learn about the league, I just read his articles.
Well, look, you have to pay more attention when you're writing if you're me now, because I'll write something and I get a call like 5-10 minutes after a post, and he's telling me what I wrote wrong and what I wrote right.
No, I'm just looking. I'm not going to agree with him every time.
Sure.
Some of his predictions, I have my views, and we talk about them. But he, I think when I talk to him, I think there's a thought process behind everything, and I see how he reaches that, the end of a solution out of everything.
Well, so the league is continuing to grow. 2 more teams this year, Minnesota and Atlanta. We get a chance actually to see them on national television this week, and that's a good thing. Get a chance to see them. How do you expect either one of these teams? Expansion year, the last great expansion year was the Fire. Going out and winning everything and winning the double.
Absolutely. Well, the last expansion team to make the playoffs after the Fire was the 2009 Seattle Sounders. No one's been able to do it since. I saw how difficult it was firsthand in Orlando. Even when you think you have a very good team, things are going to go wrong. That's just the nature of this league. Mm-hmm. You're going to have injuries. You're going to have call-ups. There are going to be problems. And when you look at these two teams, they're very, very different. Atlanta has a ton of money, and they spent it. They signed Miguel Almiron out of Argentina, Paraguayan winger, $8.5 million transfer fee. And Minnesota has 0 DPs on its team, okay? So 2 very, very different teams. I think the expectations are different. You've got an Atlanta team very, very, very talented on the top end with the 3 DPs, but they also signed a lot of really, really experienced MLS guys. that can kind of back those guys up as they transition to a new league. The expectation in Atlanta is playoffs in year one. In Minnesota, a little bit of a different building process. They took a lot more time before they got started, and they went a lot more with targeted allocation money versus with designated players. I like some of the pieces. Kevin Molino, a guy that you know very well, Johan Venegas, I really think can have a big year. But the expectations for the Minnesota, I think, are a little bit different than they are in Atlanta. We'll see. I think Frank and I are going to take a road trip up to Minnesota next week to see their home opener and get a look at them firsthand. Yeah?
I love it. You know, I mean, it's going to help us, but it's great. But I do agree with Paul with the expansion teams. I think that it's always harder for them in the beginning. They get better as the season goes on, and I think that's going to be the case for Atlanta because they do have some really talented players. And but on the other side, Minnesota, I wouldn't be surprised if they do have a better start because of a lot of more MLS caliber players or MLS players that they know a little bit more about the league. So we'll see.
Well, I'll say last year I was on the SBI show doing an MLS preview, and I'm embarrassed to go back and listen to it because I got so much wrong. This league is very, very hard to predict.
Yeah,
it's very hard to predict in preseason. So we'll see out of both of those teams. And out of two conferences, I think the balance of power might be shifting to the East.
Well, I won't ask you about teams then, but how about a player or two to watch as we get ready to wrap this show up?
Oh, there's a bunch of them. Again, I mentioned one in Atlanta, Miguel Almiron. I'm excited to see what he can do down in Atlanta, and Kevin Molino in Minnesota. Those would be the two from the expansion team. I think Sebastian Giovinco is going to be upset that he was left out of the top 3 of MVP voting last year, and not just that he didn't make it, but that the players' vote is what kept him out.
Okay.
If you're a player and you see that, and you know you're the best player in the league, I have a feeling he'll be pretty motivated. So my prediction is that Giovinco becomes the first and only player not named Preki to win 2 MVP awards. He'll join one of your old teammates, Preki, as a 2-time MVP in MLS.
Listen, regardless of what happens, I think that I agree with Paul, but it's going to be an exciting season.
It certainly will. It all gets started on Saturday, a 1 o'clock kick as the Fire take on Columbus SC. It's 12:30 with the pregame. Don't forget the home opener coming up March 11th, Chicago Fire against RSL. Thanks a lot for watching Chicago Fire Weekly, presented by the Private Bank. Check us out again next Wednesday right here on CSN.